Excuse me, do you like Dune Part 2? I really like Dune Part 2. What a perfect way to open this. Since I saw Dune Part 2 a couple weeks back, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. To give a little background, I was super hyped up for this adaptation. I had been a huge fan of Dune since I read it when I was about 15, I think. With my friend group of other film buffs, I always used to say that Hollywood should stop making so many sequels, remakes, prequels, and reboots of films that were already good, and that instead they should be remaking movies that were garbage, or at least cheap. Films that had huge potential but were limited by a below-par production. The example I always used to use was Dune 1984, but I'll talk about that movie a little bit later. And then one night I watched Blade Runner 2049 in the cinema. Because of all the sequels and remakes that were coming out left and right, I thought this was just going to be another shit show. And I literally left the theater crying because it was such a beautiful film. I might do another video on it in the future, but to put it simply, it was one of the greatest sequels I'd ever seen, and quite possibly the greatest cinema experience I ever had. It pretty much reminded me why I loved films in the first place. So in 2019, when it was announced that Dune would be getting a remake, I was so pumped. And then I found out that the film would be directed by the guy who made Blade Runner 2049. To say the least, my excitement was through the roof. And then 2 years later, Dune Part 1 came out. And what did I think? I loved it. I didn't think it was without flaws. It certainly had some, but overall it was an epic experience that mostly got it right. Overall, it's like an 8 or an 8.5 out of 10 for me. However, there was one thing that did worry me a little bit. After seeing it and being excited for the next one, I found out that the second film hadn't been greenlit yet. So they made this whole first half of a duology with no guarantee that the second one would even happen. Obviously that doesn't matter now because the second film is already out, but at the time, it really did affect my opinion of Part 1, because this was a movie that couldn't exist without a follow-up. Can you imagine if the film had bombed and the second one hadn't come out? It would be so awkward. Although this was an initial fear, it did make me realize how dependent this film was on having a sequel being made. And if the second film wasn't good, it would permanently affect my enjoyment of the first one. Kinda like how I enjoyed The Force Awakens and parts of The Last Jedi, but The Rise of Skywalker was so disappointing that it negatively affected my enjoyment of all three movies, and now I don't like any of them. So, a lot was depending on this film, and a couple weeks ago, it came out, and I immediately went to see it. Was it any good? Yeah. This movie is incredible. I don't even know where to begin or how to collect all the things that I loved about the movie into a cohesive script. This might be the greatest sequel I've ever seen since the last sequel that he made. I could talk about how amazing the acting is, how Timothée Chalamet genuinely blew me away because I didn't think he was right for the part initially, and boy, did he prove me wrong. He was genuinely intimidating by the end of it, something I wasn't expecting to say about Smoked Cheddar to Ass Getter. I could talk about how this movie essentially does all the things about the first one I liked, and gave me even more of it. Harkonnen was frightening in the first film, he's even scarier here, and he has an equally frightening Elvis impersonator.
Lord have mercy.
The action was good in the first one. Oh boy. I'm not sure I could do a coherent review of this film. I'd be stimming for ages. But there is one aspect of this movie that I noticed and really liked. Something that wasn't present in the 84 film. And this is the aspect of Dune Part 2 that I want to talk about in this video. So even though this movie is amazing, and most people who saw it thought it was amazing, and the reviews of it have been amazing, it's no secret that this film actually makes a lot of changes from the book. In fact, the very few negative responses I've seen to this new film is how it deviates from the book and doesn't feel like a conclusion, setting up a part 3. Oh yeah, I should probably say, spoilers, if you haven't seen this film yet, do not watch this video. Or do watch this video, I don't know, I'm a bit lonely. By comparison, the 84 film is technically a more accurate adaptation to the events of the book. I say technically for an important reason, because Dune Part 2 may be a less faithful adaptation, but it is also a more faithful adaptation. Okay, let's start that again. What is the most important part of an adaptation? Ask yourself this. In a story, let alone a book, but any story, you have characters, you have events that take place, but you also have a meaning. You have metaphors, symbolism, ideas, and concepts that the author wants to express. Frank Herbert wanted to tell a story that was a warning against authority figures. Regardless of whether a leader is good or bad, the blind following of a public figure and the worshipping that follows is ultimately dangerous. And he tells it in a world that is essentially his trippy version of all the aspects of the world he has researched. Hence why there are so many references to Islam, Buddhism, Catholicism, and the Jesuits. The Bene Gesserit. The fundamental core of a story is the idea that fuels it. Like, what is the meaning of, say, Lord of the Rings? It's an allegorical story inspired by World War I. What is the meaning behind Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? It's about humanity, what it means to be human, and seeing the line of humanity being men and machines start to blur. What's the meaning behind War of the Worlds? To take the British Empire at the height of its power and remove that power by degrading them to the mere animals that this new empire treat like cattle. The adaptations of these works may differ. Some might make slight changes, some will make major changes to the point of feeling like a completely different story, but their core ideas are there in some shape or form. Then you get what I like to call wiki adaptations. What I mean by that is when you get a film adaptation that is incredibly accurate to the events of the story, but you feel like something is off, as if someone is just reading the Wikipedia plot description to you. The tone is wrong. The context behind the events are missing or skewered, and now, despite the film being accurate to the story, it now feels completely wrong and alien to what it used to be. A perfect example for this would be Zack Snyder's Watchmen. I used to love this movie when I was 14. Is the greatest diss you could say to Zack Snyder, but as I get older, I start to realize that this movie just doesn't understand Watchmen. He took a graphic novel that was famous for being a satire of comic book superheroes and glorified violence, and then made a hyper-violent and hyper-sexual comic book movie where the costume designs are changed because they look cool, and bones are broken and blood is gushing everywhere because it looks cool. And then the one shot from the comic that has all the blood and guts in it has no blood and gore whatsoever in the movie. You know what? This movie's awful, and I still see people defending it, although Zack Snyder fans will literally defend anything he's made despite how awful all of his movies are. So yeah, the point is clear. The events of the story don't have to remain the same. It's an adaptation. It's in the name. Changes are made because you can't do a word-for-word retelling of a story. Books and films are completely different art forms. You have to rework it. But you can make changes that will work better for a film. And I feel like Dune Part 2 is a perfect example of changes being made that still stay true to the original concepts of the book. And I want to go through each change that I liked and explain why I think they are good adaptations. The first change would be Chani. Chani is a lot more vocal in the film. She is essentially an atheist who doesn't believe in the prophecy, and although she loves Paul, she is against whatever it is he is going to become. I feel like this works for a number of reasons. It's more interesting. Chani in the book is a Fremen loyalist who sticks by Paul wherever he goes, and that's just not interesting to watch. It's interesting to read, but it's not interesting to watch on screen. Having this conflict between the two of them really makes their romance more entertaining to watch, because now it's no longer a simple, I love you, I know. Now there is ambiguity, there is tension, there is uncertainty. It also helps to build the world of Dune. The idea that not every Fremen is religious, because in the real world, yeah, not every culture is the same, and within one culture, there are different opinions and beliefs. The conflict also helps as being part of the main driving force behind the story. The fact that Paul's rise to power is not a good thing, that there are going to be grave consequences to his actions, that he is losing his humanity as he becomes the Kwisatz Haderach. This is the entire point of Dune, that Messiah figures are dangerous. Frank literally had to write a sequel to Dune to explain that because he was tired of the fact that the general public kept on missing the point. Another change, and this is probably the one I'm most impressed with, is the handling of Princess Alia. Admittedly, I wasn't sure how they were going to pull that off, and I was kind of concerned a little, because it is a really weird part of the book. The decision to not have her in the movie, at least not how she is in the book, opens up a lot of mini changes, like a domino effect of changes. And to be honest, most of the changes surrounding Alia are the most notable about the film. To recap for anyone who doesn't know, if you're watching this video and you've just seen the film but you've not read the book, Princess Alia is born in the book and there is a time jump. I can't remember if they specify in the book if it's like 3 years or 5 years, but yeah, we jump ahead in time to when Paul has become one of the Fremen. He's in a relationship with Chani. They actually have a son of their own, a baby called Leto II who dies in the Harkonnen attack on the main Fremen village. That's another whole subplot that is not in this film. And Princess Alia is an infant toddler, but she talks like an old lady because she has all the memories of the Reverend Mothers. It's actually Princess Alia who kills Baron Vladimir Harkonnen in the book. So yeah, that's actually a lot of changes in one. First of all, I like the decision to have Alia be a present and sentient character, but remain inside her mother. Not only is it creepy AF, but it means that you don't have to jump forward in time. And I'm so glad that they didn't. Again, it works in the book, but it wouldn't work in a movie. To have the previous film set up the journey of Paul and the friendship with him and Chani, and then the second film just skips to when they're married and with kids. Now that there isn't a jump forward in time, we can see Paul become one of the Fremen. We can see Chani fall in love with him. It helps to make this movie feel like a natural progression from the first film, while still retaining the book's weirdness with the pregnant mummy and her demon child who speaks to her brother from beyond the blue womb of doom. This also means that we see Paul kill Baron Harkonnen, not Alia. This is a change I'm impartial to, because I like both versions for different reasons. But in this film, it helps to make the conflict a bit more personal. You know, this is about Paul getting revenge for the death of his father, so he kills the man who killed his father. This next one is not necessarily a change in the story, but a change in presentation. And it's something that I've seen some people criticize, and that's Christopher Walken as the Emperor. Mainly because for a character so big and important, he's barely in the film. Some people don't like how un-emperor he's like, and some people say he's just being Christopher Walken. I mean, that last part is true. But you know what? It's Christopher Walken, and I will happily watch him for hours. Listen, Paul, Ooby-Doo, I want to be like you, ooh. But here's the thing. The Emperor is not important. All of his decisions are influenced by both the Bene Gesserit and, more importantly, the Spacing Guild, because he who controls the spice controls the universe. This is a perfect metaphor for the real world, because in real life, it's not the king and queen who control, it's the government. And then on top of that, the government's decisions are influenced by the elite rich who control the resources of Earth. The spice is like oil, and the Spacing Guild are like Amazon or Bezos or Musk, whoever you want to imagine them as. The Emperor is a weak man, so to strip him of his king-like attire and essentially make him an old man in robes, I felt like this really helped to further punctuate that point about the book. He is not the king of the universe. It's literally just Christopher Walken. Anyway, these are the major changes to the book that stuck out to me, and I thought they were really good and well handled. And I think it's a great example of how you can make an adaptation of a story that changes the events to suit a new art form, but keeps the meanings and ideas of the original. And in some way, those changes can help to expand on certain ideas of the book. Compare this to the 80s version of Dune, which is a wiki adaptation. This movie acts as a perfect contrast to the new Dune films, because technically, yes, the movie does manage to fit so much of the book into just 2 hours. And admittedly, I am kind of impressed by that. However, all the context, all the meaning is just not there. This movie does not have the source. And this can be summed up in the ending of the film. Paul, with the help of the Fremen and Atreides weapons, barge their way into the Harkonnens' base. Paul fights Fade and kills him with a blade that was hidden in Fade's own suit. Alia kills the Baron. Paul is the Kwidatz Haderach, and he takes Emperor's throne by marrying his daughter and becoming the heir. But then he makes it rain. He literally makes it rain. They take him being the Messiah way too literally. It doesn't help that the music is all triumphant, everyone is cheering and clapping. It's clearly presented as being a happy ending. Like Star Wars, Paul is Luke, and he just defeated the Empire. This is what I mean about adaptation, and why the 80s Dune is fundamentally broken in that respect. Everything is there, but it just misses the point. Another example of this is Alia's line after Paul kills Fade. For he is the Kwidatz Haderach. This is actually because Paul wasn't originally meant to be the Kwidatz Haderach. The Bene Gesserit's original plan was for the Atreides to have a girl, the Harkonnens to have a boy, they would have children, and they would rule the universe, uniting the bloodlines. And when Paul was born a boy, there was discussion and debate to whether Paul or Fade could be the Kwidatz Haderach, which is essentially the true meaning of the fight. Their fight, and whoever wins, changes the whole trajectory of the universe. And that's why Alia says, for he is the Kwidatz Haderach, because he was victorious from the fight. Do you get any of that from the movie? Or is it just a cool line to end the movie off with? Because Paul is the hero! He rose up against the bad guys! And the story is so cool, you guys. I love Star Wars. I love Dune. I think you all get my point with this. If you're going to adapt something, your priority should be the meaning, the spirit of the book. And to make all the fans of the 80s film happy, I will quickly tell you everything that I actually liked about the 80s Dune. Patrick Stewart. He's Patrick Stewart, need I say more? Some of the sets and costumes are pretty cool, despite the visual effects being square. Do you see what I did there? The visual effects are square. Do you get it, guys? The score from Toto and Brian Eno is genuinely more memorable than Hans Zimmer's score, and Brian Eno's desert piece perfectly captures the eerie nature of the book. And Peter de Vries is genuinely the only character who was actually better in the 80s film than in the new ones. I also want to note that despite me really disliking the film, please don't think that that reflects my opinion on David Lynch. And if you watched the 80s film and didn't like it, please check out his other work. Literally, all his other movies are great. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe, because this is the first video I've made like this, and if you guys like watching this, I'll definitely be encouraged to make more. I've got a song coming out in April, so you should definitely subscribe and stick around to check that out. And yeah, I hope to see you guys soon.